Hi, everybody. Welcome to The Right Conversation with Shari Pheasant, where we talk about the hard stuff. I get into the real good things that you really want to hear when you listen into conversations with people. Look, communication isn't the biggest problem on a team. The biggest problem on a team is not having the right conversation soon enough. And the right conversation is really about 5 factors. Talking to the right person about the right thing at the right time, with the right tone and intonation, and with the right intentions. So join me for the right conversations that I have with my guests, and you get to hear all about the hard stuff. You're going to love this. So let's dig in. Hi, everybody. Shari Pheasant here for The Right Conversation. Today, I have a very special guest with me. She has been doing some things in the automotive aftermarket that are changing lives for years. And I'm so happy to bring her out to really talk about them. Sara Fraser, who's with Haas Performance Consulting. She has really morphed herself in the last several years from being a creative designer to being someone who is hiring and helping leaders understand their communication, even the owner of the company, who happens to be her dad. So I am thrilled to bring on board Miss Sara Fraser, changing the world one millennial and 10 boomers at a time. Hi, Sara.
Hey, Shari. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, I am excited. Look, I really love the things that you want to talk about, right? The employee life cycle, generational differences, leadership and the need to shift, right? Assessing your own value and understanding it and having your voice heard. And I'm really, really interested in communication, collaboration, and inclusion, right? What actually happened versus what we want to believe in our own heads, right? So everybody stay tuned for this podcast. By the way, I have a feeling there's going to be a second episode. So make some time in your day for this because we're going to dig into some cool stuff. So let's start easy in. So let's talk about the employee life cycle, Sara. A lot of people believe that like when they start working for you, that's the beginning of the cycle. And the employee life cycle really starts with how they see your website online. And it continues all the way to what they say when they don't work for you anymore. And people really forget about that. And I think that's really important, right? We have all of these online review places where once people don't work for you anymore, they can really leave like, was the culture what they said it would be? Are they portraying the right culture? And I think it has to do with interviews. You do a lot with hiring, and people will see something online on a website, and then they go in for the interview, and it's entirely different. So the life cycle of the employee and understanding it is really important. What are some of the things you come across in your hiring and your interviews that are related to that?
For sure. So when we look at hiring right now versus how hiring happened 10, 15, 20 years ago, it's so different. You don't have people just walking by and filling out paper applications to apply for positions. Everything is starting online. That's where you're getting the bulk of your applicants. And that's where we're searching for our applicants too. But so much goes into the decision of somebody to apply to your company after they read that job ad. So the job ad is a huge piece, and it needs to really reflect what the company is. And it can't be cookie cutter. It can't sound like everybody else's, because you need to show what you bring to the table that's different, but you also need to stand behind whatever it is you're putting in that job ad. I mean, we've all encountered the situation where we interview somebody, we think they're somebody, we think they have this skill set, you hire them only to find out that's not at all the person we thought we hired.
Wait, you mean they just said it in the interview to get the job? That's not really who they are? Oh, sorry.
Yep, for sure. And employees are going through that too, where they think that a job is a certain thing and it's sold to them as something, and then they go to work there and find out this isn't the culture they talked about. They say they treat their employees like family. Well, they must really dislike their family if that's how they're treating employees, right? So, and I say don't even put we treat people like family in job ads, because it's so overused. It doesn't have a lot of weight to it anymore. So the cycle of an employee looking to come to work for you really does start long before that interview. They're going to look at your social media. They're going to look at your website. They're going to look at your reviews. They're going to check you out. Mm-hmm. So something I always try to tell people as well is, we're asking our customers to go to Google and leave us great reviews. Ask your really good employees to go and leave a great review about their experience working for you and why they like to work there, because not only is that going to speak to potential prospective employees, it's also going to speak to your potential prospective customers who are reading that and going, wow, people really like to work there. This must be a good place to bring my vehicle. So having those reviews from employees as well as customers is great. So that life cycle does start before the interview. Then obviously we do a very lengthy interview process. We really like to avoid the situation of hiring that person and finding out that they're a completely different person. So I think that kind of ties into what you're talking about the beginning of that life cycle.
Absolutely. And I think you're right that it's the interview process has changed. I know there's entire companies that are being created to help different businesses find employees now. You've been doing that for some time. And it's not just in the automotive aftermarket. By the way, folks, if you're listening, Sarah is in the automotive aftermarket. One of our companies happens to be a maintenance and repair shop that we have. And so I do play in the automotive aftermarket a lot, along with 15 other industries. However, I always say the automotive aftermarket is like the mafia. Once you're in, you never get out. Right.
I'm pretty sure I've been in it since birth, whether I wanted to be or not. So
I'm pretty sure you were too. Yeah. Your dad has been very well known in the industry for coaching and consulting for some time. It's so nice to see him bring up the second generation of that. And speaking of which, Sarah, so how's that been? Baby boomer, millennial. You're really, I think in the beginning, maybe, right? Like all good parents, we don't listen to our kids much. No, I'm just kidding. We do. But, in the business sense, we're more experienced. We know what we're doing. We bring someone in who isn't maybe as experienced. It happens to be our kid. And so it may take a little while for you to come into your own space where you're heard. And I've really seen that happening with you with a lot of your talks and teachings that you've been doing lately. So you've been traveling a lot in the industry teaching. How has that experience been working through that with your dad?
It's been a pretty cool evolution. I'm not going to lie. The whole process of coming into his company is a little bit different than I think most people thought it was. My dad did not ask me to come to work for him. It was not a, hey, I need somebody, come work for me. My dad's been in the industry his whole life, right? I've been around it, but never thought I would be in it. I took a job working. I went with my mom to help her find a car. And the car place, the owner knew my mother-in-law. And so he knew me a little bit. He had heard about me. So we started chatting as we're helping my mom find this car. And all of a sudden I feel like I'm being interviewed. And I said, Glenn, are you looking for somebody to work for you? And he was like, actually, yeah, I am. I'm looking for somebody to just help answer phones a couple hours a week, and so I hemmed and hawed about whether I even wanted to go work in an auto repair and sales service center. It was kind of this thing. I've been around it. Do I want to really get into it? 15 hours a week, part-time thing. Okay, I took it. I ended up working there for 6 years. By the time I left, we had gone he was a one-man shop. He did everything. He bought the cars. He fixed the cars. He sold everything on his own. So by the time I left 6 years later, we had a staff of 15 people. We had acquired a second building. We had a sales manager, a finance manager, multiple technicians, service advisor, the whole thing. So I really got to learn this industry in a shop that was growing
through it.
Yeah. And I went from this part-time gig of answering the phone to now being a full-fledged office manager. I learned payroll. I learned the QuickBooks. I learned everything.
Were you doing hiring? Were you doing hiring?
I was not doing hiring, but I was watching hiring happen and learning how not to hire.
I was going to say, I'm feeling like that started coming where you are now with hiring started back then.
So I was a store, prior to doing that, I was a store manager for Blockbuster Video. So a lifetime ago, I was doing hiring and firing and all of those things in running a store. Being in this shop, the owner was at his heart a car salesperson, right? So somebody would come in for an interview and all of a sudden he'd go into sales pitch and he'd start selling the job to this person, walk him around the whole shop, introduce them to everyone, which is great. But he would miss the listening to that person. And so he would be very quick to hire and not really get to know about that person, if they were going to fit the culture, what their skill set was. It was more of a...
Can you breathe on a mirror? Yep, fogged it up. I'm alive.
Yeah.
You're hired.
Yeah, and so I did learn a little bit about the hiring in just kind of being a sponge in that environment and
Mhm.
absorbing a lot. I never thought in my 6 years there that it was setting me up to do what I do now, but looking back on it, everything just lined up in a way that you couldn't ask for a better transition. So after 6 years of doing that, I just wanted to do something different. I started looking at what am I qualified to do? What do I want to do? What am I excited about doing? And I knew I wanted to be a little bit more creative and just couldn't figure it out. For about a year, I was hemming and hawing. Where am I going to go from here? What do I even, I didn't go to, I went to college for a year. I didn't get a degree.
Mhm.
Don't have this strong background of, I was a store manager for Blockbuster Video. I thought I'd be a district manager. That company doesn't exist anymore. So my plans changed. And so then it just was through conversations with my dad and talking about social media. It was like, hey, what are your clients doing for social media right now? And, keep in mind, this was six,
You
7
were
years ago.
asking him. You were
Yeah.
asking Bill.
Yeah.
Okay.
And a lot of them just really didn't have much of an online presence. So I came
Mhm.
in and I started helping with that. And that's how I came to work for my dad. I really created a position for myself within his company. I created something that didn't exist already where he was like, hey, I need this. Come to work for me. I basically said, can I please come work for you? It was more of that. It was a little bit different than I think a lot of other sons and daughters
Mhm.
going to work for the family. And so that happened. And there's another side to that as well, in that I had gone to see him speak in Chicago, and he was teaching a class. And after that class, we were driving back to Appleton, Wisconsin, which is where we lived at the time, where I lived at the time. And I had a conversation. If you ask him, I said something along the lines of, "Oh, I could do what you do." But
Oh, that's a great millennial statement. I love it.
what had really happened was earlier that day, he was talking to somebody about how another trader had gotten sick or something had happened, and my dad had stepped in and taught some of their classes for them. And I was
Mhm.
kind of saying, like, if something were to happen to you, I feel like I could probably step in and relate to some of this material and be able to do it. He heard, oh, I can do what you do. And he was like, no, if you're going to do it, you need to own it. You need to write your own material. You need to have your own class. You need to, and anybody who knows me from back in the day growing up, when they find out that I speak in front of rooms full of people, they are just so shocked because I was very shy, very introverted, not somebody that you would think would be recording a podcast right now or speaking in front of people. So it's very interesting. But yeah, he, about a year later, as this whole thing was evolving with me trying to get out of my current job and find something different, he was like, hey, I'm going to be doing this class on generations X and Y, which is a topic he'd been talking about for quite a while. But he was like, there's this new generation, Gen Z, coming up. They're still kind of young, but I think you should put something together and come do a little bit in my class about Gen Z. And I did. You couldn't pay me any amount of money to go. If there's footage of that, I wouldn't watch it. I mean, I was so nervous. I had my paper written out. I went up there and I probably went like, and that's something about Gen Z. And I put it down and I went and I sat back down and I was just like sweating and terrified. But we all start somewhere. We all start somewhere. And
We all have to start somewhere. Absolutely, Sarah. And you know what? I remember one of the things I loved about your dad was he talked about the things nobody else talked about. He was having the right conversations when people didn't understand. That's the right conversation about millennials and generations. And so to see him pass that torch to you, I think is amazing. And I love what you're doing with the hiring of how you're really digging into things and talking to people about culture and even the shops, like the other side of it, where you're helping them understand that leadership has to change. It can't stay the same as it was anymore. What are some of the big differences that you see in leadership with in the hiring and in the space that you're in? I mean, what a great space. What are the things that leaders need to hear today in this podcast from Miss Sara Fraser about change?
be open-minded and be adaptable. And I look at that with my dad bringing me in. I think about that as a good example because he probably never thought one of his kids was going to come and try to work in his space and do something completely different. And like you said, he's a boomer and I'm a millennial. we think very differently. We don't always agree, but he has always been my biggest cheerleader and been so open-minded to anything I bring to the table and go, hey, I think I want to do this, or why don't we maybe do a class about this, or should we talk about this topic? And then he's open-minded to it, and he's adaptable in some ways. We're still working on some things, like
adaptable in some
trying
ways.
to get, get on the same page with using Google Drive and stuff like that, embracing technology, but be open-minded to being able to adapt to things that could make your life easier, especially when we're talking about Gen Z. This is a generation that works smarter, not harder. So if they're bringing new ideas to the table, if they have things they want to try, to be at least open-minded to seeing that through or having a discussion with them about it.
Absolutely. It does need to be different than it was before. I tell leaders that they need to listen more, and they need to let go more. And then I have to turn around to the employees or staff members or team members and say, and you need to allow that to happen and not become a coyote and eat him alive or eat her alive, right? Because the minute leaders make mistakes, then the workforce wants to say, see, they don't deserve to be in that position, or we don't have to listen to them, and that's really not what it's about. If you want people to be transparent and authentic and vulnerable, right, then we have to allow that in a very safe space, which brings me to belonging and inclusion and leaders needing to shift on that. Tell me a little bit about that, because that really is your generation.
100%. Millennials want to belong to something. We want to be a part of something. We want to be included. We want our voices heard. What drives millennial generation is knowing that we're making a difference. We are making some type of positive change. So being able to be included in big decisions or even minor decisions is something that's very important. And I don't think we often think about that. So I look back at my time working as an office manager, and there were times where it would just be me, the finance manager, and the sales manager in the office. Maybe later in the day, kind of quiet. My boss would come in and he'd be like, hey, John and Jody, come to the back. I want to talk to you about something. And so I would all of a sudden feel instantly excluded, because it was, okay, well, why are you not just having this conversation right here? Is this something I'm not supposed to hear? What is this about? Why am I not being involved in that decision? Granted, if it was something I needed to know about, I did typically find out about it later, and I don't think my boss meant any harm by doing that. He was just the kind of guy who liked to have little huddles, and he was the kind of guy, if something was on his mind, he wanted to talk about it right then. So I think,
so like with an individual, he would like individuals, he would just keep huddling with individuals versus bringing the whole team together.
Right. Okay. We would do the whole team every morning, so we did do that, but during the day, sometimes it would be like that. And looking back on it, I wish I had the communication skills I have now to have the conversation with him and let him know how that made me feel excluded, and it made me feel really unimportant. And when that would happen, my morale for the day would just drop, because I'm all of a sudden like, oh, well, my voice doesn't matter. I'm not included in this, or maybe they're talking about me, and that's where it goes to what I was talking to you about earlier, was what really happened versus the story I'm telling myself, and trying to match the difference between that. Because what really happened was, it probably either had nothing to do with me, or it was just on his mind and he wanted to go to the back. So if it was more quiet, or if a customer came in, or if the phone rang, and that was my job to answer the phone. So obviously I needed to stay at my desk and be there to answer the phone. So I don't think that there was ever an intentional exclusion happening. But the story I was telling myself was completely different. I was telling myself, I don't matter, I'm not important, they don't want to know what I think, they don't care what I think. And I wish I had been able to use my voice in the way that I can now to have a conversation about how that was making me feel. And is there a way that maybe you could let me know, hey, we're just going to be discussing this. And at least then I know, like, oh, I already know about that, or we already talked about that this morning, or so I didn't feel so excluded in the moment.
Well, I'm sure you've loved this conversation, and you can tell that it's not over yet. So join me on the inside in the next podcast, where we're going to continue our conversation.